in Afghanistan together, and so we've got a history.
Yeah, we've got a history.
So go ahead, Roger.
Okay. Well, first of all, what I've got to say is, well, I've changed the title, and my co-presenter begged off. He's in Albuquerque right now, so you'll have to put up with just me. So there's my title. I thought about rural America, and that's what I studied many, many, many years ago at Penn State University. My advisor was from Oklahoma, and it was in the early 70s. And as Paul knows, that's when rural development was sort of getting started. And he talked me into working in that area. So I did, wrote my dissertation in that area and all that good stuff. But obviously, as Paul knows, and some of you know, I've been around the block many times, different places. Even here at NMSU, I taught in the math department for a while, but I'm actually an ag economist. And so I put down something that, just to sort of get us started. I think every person, regardless of where they live or what they do, is deserving of equal access to resources, opportunities, services, and pursuit of general welfare. So that's an all do good thing for everyone. And that's where I come from. So when I started putting this thing together, I thought, well, I'll just give a couple definitions, a little bit of data, make some comments, and obviously questions and explanations are very welcome. My wife, Julia, and I, Escarcega, we've lived here about 15 years now. And I'm not from here. And as Julia, who is a social worker, actually, tells me almost every day, if you're not from here, you really shouldn't really talk about what's going on in New Mexico. And I'm not from here. I'm from Ohio, but I've been here long enough and I've been around the block a bit. So I thought the way I'd start is just what is rural? And of course, my first comment is it depends who you ask. And I sort of searched around in the internet here a little bit, and depends on the definition. There are many definitions out there. And I found these two pictures that just show sort of a contrast of urban and rural. The Census Bureau, basically, I think I'm right, at least it's one of the things I found, they say anything that's not urban is rural. Well, that's real helpful, but we go on. Now, the Office of Management and Budget, it uses this idea of metropolitan counties, which are essentially greater than 50,000 persons, and everything else is a non-metro county. And it would be outside the boundaries of metro counties. Now, of course, Paul and I are sort of products of USDA, ERS, and I kind of like their definition. A basis of their definition is, well, they have three different definitions. Who's surprised? One is an administration definition, one is a land use definition, and one is an economic definition. Excuse me. I kind of like the third one there, that economic one. In fact, that was some of my early work, a central place plus commuters into that central place. I kind of like the ERS definition myself, but that's probably biased because of my previous work and so forth. And then I did, just for fun, look up the Merriam-Webster definition of or relating to the country, people, or life, or agriculture. Now, most of us obviously think of rural and agriculture as being synonymous, and generally they are, but not quite, I don't think. In fact, a lot of us who grew up on farms, we are in rural, of course, but there are a lot of other folks as well. So then, so any comments or questions about that definition? There are many. Yeah. Okay. Then the next slide I showed was just one I took out with my camera, trying to show, well, it took me a while to do this. I took this picture with my own cell phone right out the back door of our house. We live up here on Space Murals Lane. We've lived up here for 15 years now after I retired from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Came out here, and as Paul knows, got involved in many things, one of which was going way off over there to Afghanistan, which is a whole nother can of worms, I guess you might say. But I took this picture one day a couple years ago, actually, right outside our back door. Um, you know, I thought it was kind of interesting. Those are Mexican poppies, and they don't show up every year, but it's just to kind of show what's out here in this rural area. Okay, my next slide is really numbers. And it's just New Mexico numbers, really. And I went back to 1980, and I just looked at our urban and rural numbers, population, really. According to the census, or it's really well, this one would be Census Bureau definition, I think. And just to show that back in 1980, which I guess is what, about 50 years ago, well, not that many, 40, about 43% of New Mexico was considered rural. And it declined a little bit over the decades till 2019, about a third. So New Mexico is rural. Okay, we all know that. We've driven around New Mexico a bit. It's open spaces and all that. For the U.S. as an average, it's not a third. It's only about 20%. So we're a little more rural than we're actually quite a bit more rural than the average for the U.S. So you know, as we all know, New Mexico is a very rural state. Anyway, it's defined about a third of the state's population. And my main point there, I guess, is it cannot be forgotten. Let's not forget our rural folks. And just a general comment, every time I look in the newspaper these days, there's mention of rural, which I don't think was always the case, but it seems to be popping up a little bit more and more in our general conversations, which I think is a good thing because there are quite a few of us out there. And in terms of New Mexico, right now, about 686,000 persons are living in rural parts of New Mexico. It declined a little bit from 2010 to 2019, but not that much. Okay, my next slide. Well, then I started thinking about, since we're rural and we're way out there, and including, you know, my little trouble getting this connection made, and my wife Julia fights with it every day. We all know that these connections are just a modern day necessity. We gotta have them. And I promise not to get too political here, but you've probably already figured out politically where I come down. But I was just searching around on the internet, just sort of looking at this rural stuff and how well they're connected. And I came across this headline, which I copied. The Trump administration invests 86 million in rural broadband services in 8 states. I was going to check and see if it actually happened. I doubt if it did happen, actually, to be blunt. I don't know if it did or not. But my next thing that I copied was which 8 states got it. And USDA, Department of Agriculture, where both Paul worked there, and I've known a lot of people who've worked there, is providing loans to our telecommunication providers to build, expand, and improve broadband services, all good things. But I put it up there just for the states: Alabama, Arkansas, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Tennessee, Texas, and Wisconsin. Supposedly that's where the funds went. Did they actually go? I don't know. And then my next thought was, well, where does New Mexico stand? We know we're very rural. We know we're very isolated. And then I just kept searching around on my internet, and I saw something. This is a private company. It's called Broadband Now, exclamation point. And of course, they want to sell us all, high-powered internet services. Where I live, we don't have it. We don't have 5G up here. I don't know, maybe most of you have 5G where you are, but we don't where we live. They did give this statistic about, if I can read it, about 79% of New Mexicans have access to broadband of 100 million bytes per second or faster, which isn't too bad, but we don't rank very well according to the other states. In fact, according to them, we rank 49th. We are a very rural state, and we all know that. And then I saw this comment from our governor, I think it's in this morning's paper or yesterday's paper. I just thought I'd put it in here. Expanding broadband it's a quote, is in my mind crucial. It would benefit families, small businesses, and education. And then I highlighted, especially in rural areas. That's her term. And Julia and I, my wife, who's a social worker, we talk about this all the time. And Julia tells me that, and I know she's right, just because we get broadband services or we improve on them, doesn't mean that everybody's going to have access to those services. In fact, my wife is teaching English as a second language right now, and she has a lot of students enrolled in her class at the community college. But you know what? Almost half of them don't have access to the broadband or to the internet where Julia can actually work with them and teach. And, there are many, many issues, many problems. Some of them don't even, frankly, have a laptop. Unfortunately, there's a nice program for them, but they still don't technically have access to Canvas at NMSU. Now, I know they're trying to work on that, but my understanding is that so far they do not. So just because we improve our broadband doesn't mean that everybody's going to have access to it. So that's one comment that I was going to make. Then I started looking at opportunities. How can we improve conditions here in rural New Mexico? And I came across this little graph from USDA. They put out a lot of stuff, Economic Research Service, USDA. In fact, we have a very good extension service here at NMSU. And my partner, Michael Patrick, he works with them, and he's got a lot of new projects going, and I was hoping that he could be here to share some of the work that he's got. But this slide, it's just a slide or a graph really that I picked off the USDA website. It's about the expansion of, it's percent of income spent on food. And now we're all sort of, we're homebound and we're doing different things, with food at home. My wife is Mexican. So for Christmas, it really got me thinking about different foods. We cooked a typical Mexican dinner just for my wife and I. And, we made, we had pozole, and we had empanadas, and we had just the typical things. Corn is a big deal here in the Southwest. And I had to think back to my farm days in Ohio, where corn was also a big deal there, commercially, really. But I just, we've all got a little time on our hands. So I just searched around the history of corn. Corn is really from, this part of the world or further south, I guess, Mexico. It's been around for 7,000 years, a long time. And it's wonderful stuff, made into hominy and made into all kinds of dishes. And my other thought was a lot of the corn from the Western Hemisphere, it's multicolored. And we all know that Mexican clothing and rugs and houses, it's very colorful. So I started making that connection in my own mind. And I thought this corn really has really has some opportunities for us. And then I ran across, and I'm getting this again from a magazine that we're probably all familiar with. It's from New Mexico Magazine, and it's called Seeding the Future, Community Gardens in Espanola in Albuquerque, Reclaim Agroecology, Heirloom Seeds and Cultural Roots for the Next Generation, written by a person by the name of Alicia Inez Guzman. And it's in the New Mexico Magazine, March of 2019. And so I just, put that down as a question. Is that a possibility for this border region? I read the article, it really made sense to me. They're reclaiming some of the areas of Albuquerque that were really crime-ridden and suffering from, many of the ills of our urban centers. And it sounded to me like they've really reclaimed an area and are doing a lot with these heirloom seeds. So I just thought, is that a possibility for this border region? Uh, Michael Patrick, my compatriot, he's always traveling up north and to the east. And every now and then I gently nudge him a little bit. What about this border region? Well, he doesn't really comment very much. I know he's very busy. And I've even kind of agreed, Paul, that I'm going to work with him a little bit on one of his projects that I believe was funded by a nonprofit corporation. And I think he's behind on his reporting and so forth. And so I agreed, oh, Michael, okay, I'll help you out a little bit. This next one, I picked it off of USDA, ERS. It's really about this COVID-19. We all are dealing with that stuff. I got my first shot about a week ago. My wife, Julia, got hers Friday on campus. I'm really impressed. I have to say, I am really impressed with the way New Mexico is handling this distribution of this vaccine. I know we lag in many, many areas, but even some of our family in other states are telling us New Mexico is making national news. Yeah, we're within the top 5 states in how we're dealing with it, which I think is a great thing. And I give our governor a lot of credit for how she's dealing with it. This slide, it just shows the different areas according to ERS again, and it's ticking up in our rural areas. So we all know it's a big issue, but we're dealing with it best we can. Whoever thought we'd have to deal with this kind of stuff, but we do, and we're doing the best we can. My next slide is, I don't know, it's again just some ERS slides. I'm not going to talk very much about them. That just sort of shows some of the lag from our non-metro to our metro areas in terms of income. One of the pieces of data that I kept looking for, and I really wasn't able to find it to my satisfaction, was a ratio of of our employment to population in rural and urban areas. Um, Now we know that our rural areas are a destination for retirees. That, to be blunt, that's why we're here. We moved here from Illinois, even though my wife is from El Paso, and I'm still learning this border region. Again, this is just some employment stuff, jobs and so forth. And my very last slide, and then you're welcome to comment or question anything I've said. Just some concluding comments. Our rural areas are changing, but they cannot be dismissed. And if there's one comment that I make, that's it. We can't dismiss out of hand our rural areas. They're not, they're not the same. Some of my cousins back in Ohio, I still talk with them, and they say, Roger, it's not the same as they used to be. And I know Paul would probably say the same thing from Minnesota. I think it's just sort of I guess I'm basically an optimist at heart. I just still think there are some opportunities, though, even though they're not as obvious as we think they might be. Okay, that's my first point. My second point, obviously, is what we all know. New Mexico is a beautiful state. And I say this almost every day to my wife and to others. I'm glad I live here. And I'm a farm boy from Ohio, for God's sake. But I love New Mexico. I really do. It's a beautiful state. We do have some challenges, of course. I don't know who doesn't. But it is a beautiful state. And I'm, for the rest of my time on this earth, I'm willing to try to, do what I can to improve it. My wife is a social worker, and we economists, we tend to sort of, deal in, I don't know how to call it, but Julia is always pressing me, Roger, there's got to be some action. There's got to be some improvement at the end of your talking and whatever. I think there's some truth to that. My third point, there is a role for the public sector, and I believe very strongly in that. And to my dying day, I don't think anybody will ever, get that one out of my head. And I would say, make that a necessary role. Businesses, large and small, cannot provide adequate services for everyone. There are always gaps. And now I'm going back to some economics that I studied, and Paul did, and some others too. The circular flow of income. It works. It works. So even though we take some funds from the public sector and put it out there, people spend it, and it gets respent and respent, and we can follow it through. My fourth point is getting a little wonky, I guess, for some of our economist friends. MV is not equal to PQ. And we studied that. And my comment, blame it on his honor, Milton Friedman, for this mistaken belief. That's sort of tongue in cheek. But I think in our businesses and policymakers in general, probably not so much in the 60s, but the 70s or 80s and 90s. Yeah, let me first define what M is, the money supply, V is the velocity, how fast it turns over. And of course, the way we all pay for things now, I'm not even sure that works anymore. And the PQ part, price level times Q, and Q being the constant or the physical part. And it's just a sense that I have. You can talk me out of this one, I guess. I just believe that our policymakers for too long believe that, well, let the private sector alone. Don't interfere too much with them. They'll figure it out and we'll all benefit. I don't think it works quite like that. And I think there are many examples of what I just said: global warming, internet, healthcare. I think there are many, many ways that the public sector, there's still a role for them. My fifth point, I'm really impressed with this state. I've said it over and over, and how it's handling the COVID vaccine. Um, I thought their website was very well put together. You know, my wife and I, we both signed in, and they kept us informed with our technology or our iPhones. And we both got our first vaccine. I got the Moderna, and Julia got the Pfizer, but that really doesn't make much difference, I don't think, from what I understand. Um, thank goodness for the way we're dealing with it. It's a real problem. It's a real challenge. But I think this state is handling it so far about as well as it can be. One of the things that always concerns me a little bit about it is this deep freeze where it has to be stored. You know, an old farm boy, we knew a little bit about storage and cold storage and so forth. I guess they've got it figured out. At least we have to trust them on that. My sixth point, on a very practical point: broadband speeds do not necessarily translate to access to internet by everyone. We need devices and training too. I mean, I just exhibited that at the beginning of this little talk, how clueless I am of poking around and clicking here and there and clicking there. And my wife and her students suffer from some of the same. We need we need more training, I think, and we need just providing that broadband internet access won't quite do it in and of itself, I don't think. My seventh point, well, we do have some natural resources here. We have sun, lots of it. We have wind, lots of it. Sometimes a little bit more of both than we would like. But can New Mexico take its rightful place in the sun with regarding manufacturing of devices to take advantage of these natural resources that we do have? And we do have them. And I think I saw somewhere just not too long ago where General Motors said they're going to go fully electric by 2035. Well, we were just talking with our daughter in Texas, and she kind of laughed at that. She thinks that's fairly optimistic, and probably is. But I think New Mexico could really, really have a role in providing those resources. And my last point, and I know I've just sort of rambled on here in many different ways, as an Ohio farm boy um, raised on a tenant farm, really, in Ohio, and I had a VOAG teacher, vocational agriculture teacher, who came out to the farm where I was working my year out of high school. I really didn't have any plans to go to college, to be blunt. And his name was Fred Collier. I still remember his name. He came out to the farm where I was working. We were filling silo. Paul knows what that is, I'm sure. And he said, Roger, I think it was October, aren't you in college? And I said, no, I'm working on the farm. And he said, Roger, you dumb, and he used a word I don't like to use, you dumb bastard, why aren't you in college? And you know, as a vocational teacher of high school who sort of prompted me to thinking about how could a poor farm boy sort of get the resources together to go off to college. And I went off and I dropped out a couple times, um, once or twice for good reasons, sometimes for not so good reasons. And I was completing my master's degree at Penn State, and my advisor said, well, Roger, you want to go on? Oh, and he, thank goodness, he offered me a half-time assistantship. Otherwise, I would never have gone on. So I've done a lot of different things over the course of my life. I'm born 41, so I've got a few years on me, and here I am. So Paul, I hope that that helped
No,
helped a
no,
little bit.
for two farm boys, we had a similar background. Anyway, and then I'll open it up. I just wanted to indicate that the rural community where I grew up and you grew up is no longer there because unbelievable increase in technology and big farm equipment. And, we have, on the farm that I have, it was 200 acres my father had and mixed farming and so forth. Now it's all one crop farming, two crop farming, big hog operations, big livestock operations. And and it's only about 2% of the population on farms. There's other people living there, of course. But rural America doesn't have much to offer these days. With the economy that we have, and that's a real problem. And I think there are some opportunities, but it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. The political thing, there's a division politically between us. And so maybe with broadband and people being trained and so forth, maybe we ought to do the same thing as we did with electricity in rural areas, where we just made it happen. The public demanded that rural have electricity, and we did it.
Yep.
And we could do the same with internet if we put our minds to it.
Oh, I think if we put our minds to it, we could do it. I think that's the key, Paul. And that's sort of the key of what I've been trying to say. If we put our minds to it, I think we could do it.
So anyone else have a comment or question for Roger? Anyone?
Well, Paul, you just mentioned that 2% of our population is engaged in farming, and a bit ago, the statistic was thrown out that, like in our state, the average is, say, 25% of the U.S. is rural. What are all those other people doing out there? Just retiring?
Well, a lot of them are retired, living off of Social Security, and some, especially people that don't have an education, they're frustrated, and because the opportunities aren't there. They just aren't. And but primarily all these small towns across America now, with a gas station and maybe a school, maybe not. A large percentage of them are people living off Social Security.
I have a question. In other places where opportunities dried up, there was a migration toward places with more opportunity. Why is that not a thing for all these folks that are living out there waiting for opportunities to come to them?
Well, I don't know if you ever read the book, Hillbilly Elegy.
I did.
And, that's where their family is. That's what they know. And they're just reluctant to move where the opportunities are. I mean, after World War II, this country changed a lot and people moved to where the jobs were. But in recent times, they don't seem to be doing that. I don't know why.
Well, I agree with Paul, of course, but I just heard on the news that my home state of Ohio, there are some people moving back from, because, well, there's some infrastructure there, particularly along the lakes for recreational reasons and so forth. They're moving out of, believe it or not, California. Some of them are moving back. So, I mean, a blanket statement is,
I'm
you know what
talking
I'm saying.
Young people looking for opportunity.
Right. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean, it's just not there.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Anyone else? Comments, questions?
Yeah, Roger, I understand what you're saying about your sixth point was that even if you have broadband access,
Yes,
nominally, there's more to it than just having it sitting there waiting to be used. You got to know how to use it.
exactly, exactly.
Let me
You got to know how to use it, and you have to have the device to be able to use it.
precisely.
No,
Now, let me tell you about the other half of it.
okay, all right.
We've been here, we are down at the intersection of University and Main Street, South Main. And
Sure.
we're right close
Yeah.
to the university. And you think about
Yeah.
all the technology and all of the access we must have.
Yeah.
But I have been trying for years to get decent internet access here. It has been, every time it has fallen through. My last experience, which was about a month ago, I went through Etherlink, which is out of Atlanta, which promised me absolute. I spent an hour on those phones with these people.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Get me some internet here.
Yeah, yeah.
They promised absolutely. Well, it turns out when they came to install, it wasn't them. They were contracting with CenturyLink. And the guy from CenturyLink came here and he found out that they couldn't provide what Etherlink kept saying they could provide. So I ended up getting simply 30 megs down, 3 megs up. Now, the distinction between that is 30 megs down will get you some streaming. Yes, that's all right. The 3 megs up,
Yes.
if it's
Yeah.
constant, will get you Zoom. But when they offer 100 megs, number one, they can't provide it here. And number two, most people are not getting the uplink to be able to use Zoom properly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
it's a problem.
It's a real problem. And up here where we live off Space Murals Lane, you know, we have the kind of issues that you're talking about as well. We don't have fast internet speed up here. It seems to have gotten a little better in the last while, but I understand what you're saying. My wife's point, and mine too, is that people have to know how to access it. You know, even if you can get it, you have to know, you know, you have to have at least a gadget. Both my wife and I know a couple people that are trying to do it with their phones. And that's, you know, and that's, it can be done, but it's not a very satisfactory experience.
Charlie, this is Dave. What is the rate limiting factor in your situation?
It's the CenturyLink phone lines coming to the house.
Yeah.
I have an interesting story. I recently sold a cabin up in what's called the UP of Michigan,
Oh
the
yeah.
upper
Yeah,
peninsula.
I know where that is.
And my next door neighbor who bought the cabin from me has 3 sons, and they're all engineers. And they have elected to, to live in the urban areas, but spend as much time as possible, in these rural areas, which is the reason that they bought the cabin.
Yeah.
But so I think what I'm seeing now happening as a result of this COVID situation where we've all had to stay put, a lot of us now are depending more and more on Zoom. So I'm seeing more Zoom meetings, and I'm seeing more people working from home.
Yeah.
And I think if that trend continues, then you could see people living in rural America and actually working in what we call urban America, and
Absolutely.
and making it work. So
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
I look out into the future, I think that this is the future. I
believe that's right.
think we're going to
I
have
believe
more and more
that
people
too.
living in rural and working
Yeah.
via Zoom and, and the internet and going in for business meetings when necessary, but the residents being in rural America.
Oh, I think that's very plausible. In fact,
That could easily be our future if we could give it a little bit of thought and put resources in it.
Yep. I've got a colleague back at SIUC. His daughter works in Virginia and has just taken a job working on a newspaper in Southern Illinois. So she came back with her children, to get trained and so forth for the new job. But then she's going to go back to her place of residence in Virginia. So she's going to work on a newspaper in Southern Illinois, which is very rural, by the way.
Yeah.
While she lives outside of Washington, D.C. in a rural community as well. So yeah, I'm agreeing. I think that's the wave of the future, I'm sure.
But if you look at the like the role of the federal government back, if you go back to the age of rural electrification,
Right.
and you say right now is it like in Charlie's case, is this a last mile problem where you can get internet to the University of New Mexico State, for example, but just down the road is Charlie with this like 110 cord with no place to plug it. And where's the cost in all that? I mean, because clearly the utilities are saying it doesn't make sense to plug Charlie in.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that this idea of making it happen, I think that's a government job. That's a
It is a government job.
responsibility. And we
Because-
just hold our politicians responsible for making sure that expansion continues.
Yeah, we could revive rural America with that kind of, if they had those tools, it would be a
Yes.
different place.
Yes, for sure, Paul. Yep.
And I think the young people today living in rural America understand that. And I think they're going to work towards that same end goal. Just like my friends did, these young engineers now working, and doing a lot of Zooming and actually are able to spend more time up north. And someday I suspect they'll be able to do their jobs and
Yep.
remain rural, because that's where their real connections are, and that's where they want to be.
I agree.
So I think it's
Well,
going to happen.
Yeah,
I
do
mean,
too.
Tesla is trying to solve that problem with satellites, and apparently the speed is pretty good, but it's not cheap. I think their beta program is something like $130 or $140 a month. Not everyone can afford that.
And that, yeah,
But
that's
that
the,
will reach anywhere.
that's the
But
problem.
Steve
because-
Fishman, we had him on, and he said that is a possibility, but it's expensive and
Yeah.
maybe won't work right.
Yeah, all those satellites are causing a frustration amongst astronomers. It's a serious problem. There's getting to be so many satellites that earthbound telescopes are becoming less effective.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there you go. That's an externality, Paul.
There you go. Yeah, we heard that 101 economics, didn't we,
Yeah,
Roger?
we did. We
Yeah.
did. Yep.
And the satellite internet has issues in the rain, just like satellite TV used to have the problems. If you got a thunderstorm, suddenly you're not getting your TV program. Well, you have the same issue with satellite internet. They're trying to work around that issue.
Yeah. But it can be solved. I know it can, but it's going to take resources. And the only place it's going to come from is the public. The only
Yes.
place. Yeah.
The only place. Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Roger. Good
You're
discussion.
very welcome.
Let's give
You're
a
very
big hand to
welcome.
Roger.
Okay. Oh, thank you for inviting me. Kept my brain
You're
active for a
welcome.
while.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
anyway, next week, Jenny's son, Jeff Herrick, he's going to be talking about the positive aspects of sustainable range management from gardens to grazing lands. And it should be a very interesting discussion. So glad to see you then. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Thanks.
Leave.